Today I have pleasure to interview Mr. Dimitri Gitas, the General Manager of MSD Poland. Good morning.
Good morning, thanks for having me.
Mr. Gitas, during this year's edition of the Economic Forum in Karpacz, MSD Poland received a special award for achievement in 3 decades of operation on the Polish market. In the laudation devoted to MSD Poland, the organizers of the forum highlight the innovativeness of your company. What does it really mean in practice in case of MSD Poland?
Yeah, we're really honored to have won this award, and when you look at our company today versus where we were 30 years ago when we first came to Poland, we've grown so much. We started with a small organization of a few people, and now we're a large organization with 4 different divisions. We have close to 600 employees. We manufacture here in Poland, and so we've grown tremendously. And if you think about what this has meant in terms of investment for our organization in Poland, in the last 10 years we invested around 1.2 billion zloty in the Polish economy. And so it just speaks to not only our presence in Poland, how much we invest in the country, and also how the country is prioritized for our organization.
Mm-hmm. MSD Poland entered the 4 decades of activity on Polish market. There are the same problems here and in Europe. It's mainly about, let me call it, oncological tsunami, if you agree with me. Mm-hmm. The answer to this challenge is the European Fighting Cancer Plan or program. What role can pharmaceutical companies, and especially MSD, can play in that plan?
Yeah. So I agree. I think cancer is a big problem in Europe and in Poland as well. There are some differences when you look at Poland versus Europe, for example, and there are some challenges and some gaps that we see in Poland that are bigger issues than, let's say, the average country in Europe. So when you look at the healthcare spend as a % of GDP, the investments in Poland have been one of the lowest out of all the European countries. When you look at access to innovative medicine, it's one of the longest processes here in Poland relative to other countries. And so there are some gaps that are specific to Poland, but when you look at cancer, the burden is huge. It's a number 2 killer in Poland. Over the last 30 years, the number of malignant tumors have doubled, and so the burden of disease is very big. And so I think generally, when you look at any healthcare challenge, when you have optimal partnerships between industry, the Ministry of Health, patient organizations, and the scientific community, that's when you actually see some amazing things happen, and when you actually see some advancements in medicine and in healthcare. And a perfect example is what we've seen with COVID in the last couple of years. And so a typical process to research, develop, manufacture, and then bring a vaccine to people who need it typically takes around 7 years. And with COVID, due to the outstanding partnerships that occurred, we saw that process get done in about a year. And so when you do have this optimal partnership between companies, private and public, and also other healthcare stakeholders, we're able to see some significant progress. And so the role that we can play is obviously the most obvious one is bringing the innovations to the people who need them, continuing to invest in research and development so we continue to develop innovative vaccines and medicines. And then also I think there's a lot we can achieve together when we combine our efforts from an educational standpoint. I think when we raise the awareness of potential symptoms to help identify early cases being diagnosed early, I think that's when you have the most success in treating any type of disease. So there's a strong role that the industry can play, but it can be only strengthened through the right partnerships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you compare that situation in Poland to situation in Europe, and it's absolutely, I agree with that. But situation in Poland began to change even before the European Commission announced the draft of European Fighting Cancer Program, and public authorities presented the National Oncology Strategy lately.
Yeah.
What value does it bring in the systemic approach towards fighting cancer, in your opinion?
Yeah, it brings huge value, and I think it's a foundational element that is going to be important for future developments in terms of addressing cancer. What we've seen in the last 2 years is approval of some of the most innovative medicines for cancer treatment. Immuno-oncology therapies have been approved, and so cancer patients are now being able to access the most innovative medicines. And so it's a good first step, I would say. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, however. And we need to continue to have rapid approvals and reimbursement of the latest innovations, and so that needs to continue in the future. We also need to put in place the right programs for prevention as well, and to ensure that we can prevent future cancers from happening. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. If you actually look at some of the other challenges that still exist, we can take lung cancer as an example. Although the medicines exist out there, the time of diagnosis is still not optimal, and so we need to diagnose sooner. Mm-hmm. The time it takes to navigate through the healthcare system and to get the diagnostic workup done before a patient can actually access the treatment takes too long, so you have a lot of patients dropping out through the process. And so there's a lot of room for improvement from a healthcare infrastructure, delivery of care, and we want to partner with the different stakeholders in healthcare to be able to optimize that pathway.
Let's go back for a while to MSD. The MSD focus on breakthrough therapies. Yeah. Those that will improve the quality or extend the life of the patients, for sure. In the last 2 years, you've been reimbursed for immunotherapy treatment costs in lung cancer, like you mentioned. Yeah. Does it mean that thanks to that success, Polish patients have the equal chances like the rest of the patients from Europe?
I think we're getting there, right? Yeah. And I think certainly with some of the recent approvals, we're closing the gap between Poland and some of the other countries. But until we fix some of the infrastructure challenges, until we optimize the access to some of the vaccines that can prevent cancer as well. So Poland is one of the last countries to implement a national HPV program. Yeah. And so that's an area of focus for the ministry, and certainly we want to play our part to help introduce the right program there. But certainly it's a good first step, but there still needs a lot of work to be done in order to ensure that patients can get optimally diagnosed and therefore treated rapidly, and make sure that the patients have access to all the most innovative medicines and vaccines.
Yeah, let's talk about HPV vaccination, because we have a vaccination and to help fight the cervical cancer. Why it is so important to introduce HPV vaccination, and what is the role of pharmaceutical companies in this process? What can be done to deliver as many vaccinations as possible?
Yeah. So I think when we look to the future, what's important is to prevent cancers. Yeah. Sure, we want to treat them, but I think you have a stronger healthcare system when you're preventing disease, and this is where vaccines come into play. Yeah. As I mentioned before, Poland is one of the last countries to introduce an HPV program, and it's critically important because we have the opportunity to work towards a strategy to eliminate cervical-related cancers, and that's what we need to strive for. And so until we have a program in place that fully reimburses the vaccine, a program that's designed to provide choice, to allow the people who want to have access to the vaccine to be able to choose the most optimal vaccine for them, then we won't be able to achieve certain targets to strive for elimination. And so I guess the first step is getting a program in place. The second step is designing it in a way that can optimize choice. And when you have those foundational elements in place, then you can achieve high vaccination rates and then have optimal outcomes and prevent disease and work towards the ultimate goal, which would be elimination of HPV in the future. Now, you know, the World Health Organization has put together a strategy for HPV or for elimination of cervical cancers. This has also been adopted in Europe as well. And so in order to achieve those goals by 2030, we need to be vaccinating girls under the age of 15 at a rate of 90%. And so that's why it's important to have full funding for a vaccine, have a program that has choice, and so we can achieve those high numbers.
I think it's linked to economy too, because MSD Poland is on the Polish market over 30 years now. It's not only a partner of the healthcare system, but also a partner of the entire economy. You invest in Poland. How does it help to prevent the cancer? How does it help the Polish patients?
I think in general, we need to look at healthcare as an investment and not so much as a cost to the government. So we talked earlier about a certain gap, and as a percent of GDP, Poland as a country invests is one of the low points of all the countries in Europe. And for a country that has such a strong economy, I think we could do better. Because when you're investing, you're then making available the most modern medicines that can treat people, minimize necessity for hospitalization, decrease the time in hospital, reduce the need for any type of procedures, which also presents a lot of cost to the healthcare system. When you're investing in making available innovative vaccines, then you're preventing disease and therefore minimizing cost long-term to the healthcare system. And when you look at the last few years, the biggest negative impact that this economy has had, not only in Poland but globally, has been due to a healthcare crisis. And when you have optimal investment in healthcare, you can minimize the chance of a next pandemic, maybe prevent it, but if it does come, you can also be better prepared to address it and therefore minimize the impact on the economy. Now, as an organization, as mentioned before, we invest a lot, and so we have a big presence in Poland. We have 4 different divisions. On an annual basis, we invest 120 million zloty in clinical trials. And so we've developed a bit of a research and development hub here in Poland. And Poland is a very important market for our organization.
And my last question is, you've been in Poland like a couple months now, and you probably well knew the Polish problems of the Polish oncology. Are you pessimistic, you realistic, or how you look at the future of Polish oncology?
I'll say I'm optimistic.
You're optimistic.
Yeah, and I've been here for a few months now, and certainly came at a challenging time during the 3rd wave of the pandemic, and so we had some challenges to work through, and I've been very impressed with the way our organization has reprioritized to make sure that we can provide the best possible support for healthcare providers in Poland. But when we look at some of the elements that we talked about earlier, and you mentioned the National Oncology Strategy, I think that's foundational for the future, and I think there are certain metrics and elements that have been clearly stated in that strategy that we can strive for. And so now we have a guiding light, for example, and we can work with the Ministry of Health, we can work with the scientific community, we can work with patient organizations to try to achieve the metrics and the targets that have been in place for this strategy. And so, as I mentioned earlier, over the last couple of years, we've seen progress. We've seen over the last few months a willingness of this government to engage in dialogue, to see how we might be able to work together to achieve these goals. So as long as there's dialogue and as long as there's willingness to partnership, I'm very optimistic that we'll see a significant advance in terms of management of oncology and other diseases as well.
Okay, so we hope for the best.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.